The day everything changed. Daniel's key was already in the lock when he heard it. Not the television, not music, not the comfortable domestic hum of a household going about its afternoon business. What stopped his hand mid-turn, what made the autumn air suddenly feel 10 degrees colder, was the sound of his wife crying, not the polite, dignified weeping of a woman watching a sad film, but something raw and animal and broken, the kind of crying that a person does only when they are absolutely certain they are alone. He stood on the porch of the house they had shared for 31 years and felt the ground shift beneath him. Daniel Mercer was not a man who panicked. 30 years as a structural engineer had trained him to assess, to calculate, to find the load-bearing truth beneath any crisis. He had walked across crumbling bridges and condemned buildings and never once let his heartbeat climb above 60. But the sound coming through that door, Margaret's sound, dismantled every bit of professional composure he'd ever built. He turned the key. The living room was dim, curtains half-drawn against the October afternoon. Margaret sat on the edge of the old blue couch, the one they'd bought at an estate sale the year their daughter Claire was born, with her knees pressed together and a crumpled tissue in both hands. She was still wearing her good blouse, the cream-colored one she saved for occasions. Her reading glasses were pushed up into her silver hair. She hadn't heard him come in. "Maggie." She flinched so hard she nearly fell off the couch. Her hand flew to her chest. "Daniel, you're home early." The words came out wrong, stumbling over each other, and she was wiping her face with the back of her wrist like a child caught at something. "Conference ended at noon." He crossed the room and sat beside her, taking her hands in both of his. Her fingers were cold. "What happened? Are you hurt? Is it Claire? Is it the baby?" No, she shook her head quickly. "Claire's fine, the baby's fine, everyone is fine." "Then why?" "I'm just being foolish." She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes, didn't even come close. "Just a silly afternoon, too much time alone with my thoughts." Daniel looked at his wife, really looked at her, the way you sometimes forget to look at the person you've slept beside for 3 decades, and understood with quiet certainty that she was lying to him. Not maliciously. Margaret had never had a malicious bone in her body. But she was protecting something or someone, and the someone was almost certainly their son-in-law. Because there was a coffee mug on the table with 2 rings around it, someone else had been here. And that someone had left Margaret like this. His name was Ryan Paulson, and Daniel had never fully trusted him. That wasn't fair, and Daniel knew it. Ryan was handsome and charming and successful. He ran some kind of marketing consultancy that Daniel had never entirely understood, and he loved Claire, or at least performed love with convincing dedication. He brought flowers. He remembered birthdays. He shook Daniel's hand with both of his own and called him sir until Daniel told him to stop, and then called him sir anyway, as though the formality were a compliment he simply couldn't help paying. But there was something underneath all of it. Something careful and managed, like a house staged for sale, everything in perfect position, every surface gleaming, and absolutely nothing left out that might reveal how the occupants actually lived. Claire had married him 3 years ago in a small ceremony in Vermont, and Daniel had walked her down the aisle with a smile that cost him more effort than he would ever admit. He told himself it was simply the possessiveness of a father. He told himself that no man would ever be good enough for his daughter. He told himself a lot of things. Standing in the living room now, watching his wife reconstruct herself with shaking hands, Daniel wondered if he had been telling himself those things to avoid confronting what he'd actually known all along. "Maggie," his voice was quiet but firm, the voice he used when he needed the truth and wouldn't accept anything less. "Ryan was here." She hesitated, just a half-second, but 31 years of marriage made a half-second readable as a paragraph. "He stopped by this afternoon, yes. And we had coffee." She smoothed her skirt with both palms. "He wanted to talk." "About?" "Daniel." "About what, Margaret?" She looked at him, then really looked at him, and he watched something collapse behind her eyes, the scaffolding of the story she'd been building coming down all at once. Her chin trembled. She pressed her lips together, and then slowly she reached across to the end table and picked up her phone and turned it to face him. On the screen was a photograph. Daniel stared at it for a long time without speaking. It was a bank statement. Ryan's name was at the top. The account balance was significant, more than significant, actually, the kind of number that made Daniel's engineering brain automatically begin calculating what it represented in terms of years of work, of discipline, of careful accumulation. But it wasn't the balance that mattered. It was the transaction history. Transfers monthly going back 14 months, always the same amount, always to the same account. An account in Claire's name, but not the joint account she shared with Ryan. A separate account. A private account that Ryan had clearly discovered, and that was clearly the reason he had come here today, to this house, to sit on this couch and say whatever he had said to reduce Margaret Mercer to the broken creature Daniel had found 20 minutes ago. He thinks she's been hiding money from him, Margaret said. Her voice had steadied somewhat, taken on the careful, deliberate quality of someone reporting on a disaster rather than experiencing one. He came here to ask us to ask me if we had given it to her, if we had been helping her build a private fund without telling him. And had we? No, Margaret shook her head. Of course not, I didn't even know this account existed until he showed me. Daniel set the phone down on the coffee table between them. He laced his fingers together and looked at the blank television screen, at the dim reflection of the two of them sitting side by side on the old blue couch, and he thought very carefully before he spoke. What did he say to you, Maggie, exactly? She was quiet for a moment. He said that if she had been hiding money from him, it meant she had been planning to leave him. He said he needed to know if we knew, and then he said, she stopped, swallowed. He said that if she was planning something and we had helped her, that he would make sure we never had access to the baby. The room was very still. Outside, a car passed on the street. A dog barked somewhere in the middle distance. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. Daniel was aware of all of these sounds with crystalline precision, the way he'd once been aware of every sensation during the single moment a scaffold had given way beneath him on a job site when the world had slowed to something navigable. He picked up his own phone and called his daughter. Claire answered on the second ring, and the moment he heard her voice, bright, slightly breathless, the way she always sounded when she was managing too many things at once, he knew she didn't know Ryan had come here. Dad, I was just thinking about you. Are you home from the conference? I'm home, he kept his voice perfectly even. Are you free to talk? A brief pause, the practiced pause of a woman who had learned to read the temperature of a room or a phone call with great accuracy. What happened? Nothing alarming, he said, which was a lie but a necessary one. I just want to ask you something. Are you somewhere private? He heard her move, heard a door close, heard her voice drop. I'm private, what is it? Claire, do you have a bank account that Ryan doesn't know about? The silence that followed was 4 seconds long. Daniel counted them. Who told you that? Ryan was here today. He showed your mother the transfer history. Another silence, and then very quietly Claire said, oh no. Tell me, Daniel said, tell me everything. What she told him took 20 minutes, and by the end of it Margaret was sitting close enough to hear through the phone, her hand over her mouth and her eyes very bright. The account had been Claire's idea. Started 14 months ago after Ryan had, for the third time, made a large financial decision, a car, a renovation, an investment, without consulting her. Not out of malice, Claire explained, with the careful fairness she always extended to people who didn't necessarily deserve it. Not because he wanted to control her, but because he simply didn't think of her money as separate from his management of their life together. He was, in the vocabulary of a more patient era, a provider, and providers in Ryan's internal architecture provided, they decided, they arranged, and the people they provided for received. Claire had brought it up twice. Gently the first time, directly the second. Both times Ryan had listened, agreed she had a point, expressed genuine remorse, and then within 2 months returned to exactly the same behavior. Not dramatically, not cruelly, just with the quiet persistence of someone whose deepest habits were stronger than his stated intentions. So Claire had opened an account. She transferred a small portion of her own freelance income. She did graphic design work, something Ryan knew about but had never fully registered as a professional pursuit, into it each month. Not to leave him, not to deceive him in any way that she felt was harmful, but to have, as she put it to her father in a voice so steady it nearly broke his heart, a place that was mine, just mine, a place where I existed separately. And the baby? Daniel asked. He would never keep me from the baby, her voice was certain. That was him being frightened and saying something he didn't mean. You're sure? I'm sure. A pause. But Dad, what he said to Mom, that's not okay, that's not. Her voice finally fractured just slightly at the edges. I didn't want her involved in this. I didn't want any of this to touch you. Daniel looked at his wife, who was looking back at him with the expression she'd worn at the wedding. That precise and particular expression of a mother watching her child walk towards something and being unable to say whether it was a beginning or an ending. It touched us, he said simply. We're your parents, it always touches us. Ryan arrived at the house that evening. Daniel had called him not Claire, who had wanted to handle it herself, and who he had gently overruled for the first time in her adult life, apologizing as he did so. Some things he had told her were between a man and his wife's father. Some conversations had a specific architecture, and he was an architect. Ryan stood in the entry hall looking the way men look when they know they've overstepped but haven't yet fully processed that the overstepping was in fact theirs. Slightly defensive, slightly conciliatory, carefully uncertain which posture would serve him better. Daniel offered him a chair at the kitchen table. He sat across from him. Margaret stayed in the living room because this was not her conversation to have, and because Daniel needed to conduct it without the complication of her grace, which had a way of making difficult men feel forgiven before they'd earned it. "I want to start," Daniel said, "by telling you something about myself." Ryan looked at him warily. "I am a man who built things for 30 years. Bridges, buildings, structures that people walk across and work inside and trust with their lives without thinking about it for a single second, and I will tell you what I learned doing that." He folded his hands on the table. "The most dangerous thing in any structure is a hidden stress point, a place where pressure is building that nobody's accounting for. It doesn't announce itself, it doesn't ask for attention. It just builds and builds and builds until one day it doesn't." Ryan said nothing. "Claire opened that account because there was a hidden stress point in your marriage," Daniel continued. "She wasn't plotting against you, she wasn't building an escape route. She was creating a pressure valve because she had told you twice at minimum that something was wrong and nothing changed. That account is not evidence of her deception. It is evidence of her patience." Ryan's jaw tightened. "She should have talked to me." "She did." Daniel's voice didn't rise, didn't need to. "Twice. You listened and you changed nothing. I'm not telling you this to shame you, Ryan. I'm telling you because I need you to understand where she was before you can understand what she did." A long silence. "What he said to your wife," Ryan started, "is what I'd like to address next." Daniel looked at him directly. "You came into my home and threatened my daughter's mother with the loss of access to her grandchild. You did that because you were frightened and you wanted leverage and you reached for the sharpest thing you could find." He paused. "I understand that. Fear makes people reach, but I need you to understand clearly that that is a door you do not open in this family. Not because of any consequence I'm threatening you with, I'm not threatening you with anything. But because the kind of man who uses a child as a weapon in an argument is not the kind of man my daughter married. And you have a choice, right now, about who you're going to be." Ryan looked at the table. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, the October wind moved through the oak in the backyard. "I didn't mean it," he said finally. "What I said to Margaret, He stopped, tried again. "I was scared. I thought Claire was leaving me and I didn't know how to," I reacted. "I know. I need to apologize to her." "Yes, you do." Daniel stood, which ended the conversation without drama or declaration. "And then you need to have a different kind of talk with my daughter, a real one, about the account and about what it means that she felt she needed it, and about what kind of partnership you're actually building." He moved toward the doorway. "She's a remarkable woman, Ryan, patient and intelligent and fair. She was trying to tell you something for over a year in the only language that was left to her." He paused with his hand on the door frame. "The question is whether you're ready to learn to listen." Ryan sat with Margaret for 20 minutes before he left, and whatever he said made her nod slowly and press his hand between both of hers in the way that meant she believed him, or at least believed he was trying. After his car pulled out of the driveway, Daniel found her standing at the kitchen window with a fresh cup of tea, watching the empty street. "Do you think they'll be all right?" she asked. He stood beside her. Through the window, the oak tree was shedding the last of its leaves in the dark. "I think that depends on him," Daniel said, "and I think, for the first time, he understands that." Margaret leaned her head against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. They stood like that for a while in the house they had filled with 31 years of ordinary life, the arguments and the reconciliations, the celebrations and the losses, the 10,000 small negotiations that constitute a real marriage. And Daniel thought about structures, about the hidden places where pressure lives, about the extraordinary and underrated strength of a thing that has been honestly built. "She should have told us," Margaret said softly. "She was protecting us. From our own son-in-law." "Yes." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "That's not nothing, Daniel." "No," he agreed, "it isn't." He held his wife in the warm kitchen while the wind worked through the oak outside, and he made himself a quiet promise, the kind a man makes not with fanfare but with the full and settled weight of who he is, that whatever came next his daughter would know she did not face it alone. That the house her parents had built, the one made not of concrete and steel, but of presence and steadiness and love that asked nothing in return, would stand. Whatever came next, it would stand. Some discoveries don't come with shock or spectacle. They come quietly, a key in a lock, a sound through a door, a photograph on a phone screen, and they ask only one question: what kind of person are you going to be right now when it matters most? Daniel Mercer had his answer. He always had.